energy conservative high school student, Hodoro Otaki, ends up with more than he bargained for when he signs up for the Classics Club at his sister's behest, especially when he realizes how deep-rooted the club's history is. Begrudgingly, Otaki is dragged into an investigation concerning the 45-year-old mystery that surrounds the club room. Accompanied by his fellow club members, the knowledgeable Satoshi Fukube, the stern but benign Mayaka Ibata, and the ever-curious Eru Chitanda, Otaki must combat deadlines and lack of information with resourcefulness and hidden talent, in order to not only find the truth buried beneath the dust of works created years before them, but of other small side cases as well. Hyouka is directed by Yasuhiro Takimoto, who is known for Lucky Star and Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. But what's most curious about this anime is that even though it aired in 2012 in Japan, it didn't actually come to the West with a dub until July 4th, 2017. The dub was licensed by Funimation, which makes this a rare KyoAni anime that is not dubbed by Sentai Filmworks. And speaking of KyoAni, this anime is produced by Kyoto Animation, and if you're not somehow familiar with them, by this point, they are known for A Silent Voice, K-On!, Violet Evergarden, and Clannad After Story. This series is also 22 episodes long, with an OVA release for it as well, making it a total of 23 episodes with a runtime of 28 minutes each.
I've heard so much about the bliss and excitement of being a high school student that I've written it off as a worn-out cliche. Who's to say that all teenagers even want high school to be like some fairy tale fever dream? It seems ridiculous to me.
Hyouka is a mystery anime, and is not completely episodic, but for the most part relies on episodic elements and arcs. Typically, it's separated into two kinds of episodes, though. First off, you have arcs. These arcs are generally where Hyouka shines the most, as they are for the most part where you will see the most story progression and are generally the most enjoyable of the two. That's not to say the episodes that are episodic aren't good either. In fact, they're great, but they're more focused on adding more character for maybe Mayaka or Satoshi or Chitanda, rather than focusing on our main character, Hodoro. While these episodes are great on their own, it isn't later in the series until I feel they start to become more interesting as well. So this is really what Hyouka's formula is. And besides the OVA, it's all very well done, and the worst crime it really commits is that it's a little slow in the first arc.
Maybe you're just lazy. What do you think of that? Which explains your motto.
If I don't have to, I'm not going to. And if I have to, I'll do it as quickly as possible.
That's the one.
The first thing I want to cover is actually the fake-out confession at the very end. Now, we here at SeaTactics LLC, we don't spoil things, so this will not contain any spoilers, so you're safe to watch this. But there's a fake-out confession, and many people will bring it up that it was dumb not to have one, but I do disagree. I think there didn't need to be one at all. We already know as the audience through subtle visual cues in the latter half of the series, the two people that people have this problem with, well, they have a thing for one another. A confession at the end wouldn't fit the story of Hyouka that well. This is because Hyouka is all about context, subtlety, mystery, and the characters themselves. The show isn't really about romance, it's about the characters solving mysteries in high school and growing up as people. It's not about who the audience wants to see shipped, but when people say that they're kind of disappointed with it, I get it. We've been trained by bad romance in anime for years to expect that kiss at the end. But please, don't even go in expecting Hyouka to act like an anime half the time. If you go in expecting a mystery drama, then Hyouka will treat you well. If you were expecting all the characters to confess their love, then Hyouka is probably not for you.
What the? Is that what I think it is? A club application? Hotaro, you're joining one? Classic Lit Club, really?
Oh, you know it?
Of course I do.
Another thing I find I really enjoyed was that the show was told through the lens of the characters. The show is basically a very subjective experience, and because of this, the viewer sees things through our characters, usually Hodoro's eyes. So really, we see what they think about through a lens, mind you, who they are, their insecurities, their troubles. Unlike other stories, we get to know our classic club quartet very well, and one of the avenues is the gorgeous scenes in which a mystery is explained to the viewer. These scenes, as you're seeing, are very different, but also serve a purpose to us, the viewer. When Chitanda wraps up Hodoro in her hair and flowers blossom, it's not because KyoAni got bored, although there is a possibility there, but it's to show that there is no going back for Hodoro. This girl has trapped him in her world, and now they're connected. Of course, this is also done later on with the changing color palette, which we'll get into with the animation later. But this subject of storytelling is one of the reasons I find Hyouka so unique and different. We're in their world, in their story, and because of this, this is how you're really going to experience this anime. As KyoAni staff put it, we treasure their vulnerabilities. And I really like that about the show. I like that it tries to really get us to connect to the characters this way. So next, I want to ask the question, does Hyouka do the mystery genre justice? And this answer may be a little more complicated than on first glance. The mysteries in this series are very mundane, and they don't really have any consequences in the real life. Whether it be solving the mystery of the ending of a movie, the true story behind the book called Hyouka about a guy being expelled from his school, or even a mystery in which it's all made up as a game and the whole episode takes place in one room. Which, as an aside to that last one, I believe episode 20, the one that takes place in one room, is an incredible episode. But back on track, if you're reading this and saying, well, that sounds boring, or, well, what's the point? Keep in mind, this story is not through anyone's context other than our main characters. They're high school students. They won't be solving murders or the disappearances of people. To me, the magic of Hyouka isn't that at all. It's about these dumb mysteries that have no bearing on anything serious. I won't say every one of them has a happy ending or are fun, but the story's direction makes it quite obvious that the mystery is really just what they make of it. A great example are two characters getting stuck in a shed. There is no mystery, yet the show turns it into one. And I'm sure that sounds boring, but think about it. That's actually really freaking cool. They were so clever that they knew that doing something as simple would be a signal for help. They turned the mundane occurrence into a freaking mystery. How cool is that?
Okay, I'll help. It is interesting after all.
Thank you so very much. So do you have any ideas just off the top of your head?
While I'm full of useless information and can't make any deductions, Hotaro is the opposite. Once he's had some time to think, his conclusions are fairly accurate.
That's enough.
Next up, I want to talk about this story's overall complexity and how it goes about things in a general sense. And obviously, it's a mystery anime, which for some people is an immediate turnoff, but this anime really doesn't seem like one at first. Each mystery is presented in such a way that doesn't immediately make the viewer think, oh great, another mystery. Instead, the show naturally sets up the mystery without seeming formulaic or obvious. Some episodes, the mystery is the whole episode. Other times, the mystery is quick and simple. That's the way the show does its mysteries, and it's pretty cool. Not only that though, but they don't try to fool the viewer with the aha moments. Basically, they don't try to insult your intelligence or subvert you in a negative way that looks down upon the viewer. As we were watching for the Anime Nomad podcast, some of us were able to solve the mysteries ourselves. These mysteries weren't technical jargon written by a guy who knows nothing about a mystery, but instead are carefully crafted puzzles that we the audience can solve on our own. And if you don't want to actively solve with Hotaro and our other characters, they will do a fantastic job of explaining it in the most addictive and fun way you could think of. By the end of the second arc, I loved it when Hotaro would explain a mystery to me. It didn't feel insulting, but it felt like I was learning something, and because of that, I love this series so much more.
A calligraphy club, a basketball club, a track club, the list just keeps going. There's barely any open space left on the board.
One thing I really enjoyed about Hyouka was playing with the viewer's expectations, which in turn led to some very funny moments. After the first time we hear Chitanda's indelible "I just have to know" catchphrase, the show makes no qualms in using it just about every single episode. But after only a few times, the series plays with the catchphrase a little bit. The show knows the viewer is expecting it, and the characters do as well. This isn't lost on the characters or us, so some episodes this is used to comedic effect to lighten the mood of an otherwise pretty dark show. I always found myself enjoying these scenes, but even more were the episodes which went out of their way to be some of the most mundane and fun mysteries. For example, with the school festival arc, Hotaro starts to trade things with people to eventually see what he will end up with. Among other things, he ends up with a Glock 17 water gun and a small mirror. The way they use this in the show is great because these two items lead to, in some way, solving the mystery of that arc. Of course, I can't spoil things here, but we'll talk more about this in our podcast over on Abby's channel. Links in the description.
That's it! I must know!
Yes.
As As for the pacing of the show, it's quite well done, I must say. Hyouka is one of those shows that it takes time to get going. It's also too common I see comments like, I dropped it halfway through, and I really wanted to understand where these comments were coming from. I initially watched these episodes with friends for the Anime Nomad podcast, like I said, over on Abi's channel. But I decided to go back on my own and see what it would be like without watching it with my friends. Now, I didn't rewatch the whole series, but I did watch most of the key episodes, and the episodes I thought were the most, I guess, forgettable. And what happened is I started to understand where these people were coming from. The pacing of the first arc seems very slow, uninteresting, and just plain, to quote the series director himself. But here is the thing, I wouldn't have this any other way. I feel like Hyouka is a series where you love it or hate it. And from what I see myself, the people who dropped it, there's only a minority of those people that actually hate it. I've seen nothing but love for this series from the people who never got around to finishing it too. Some of this may be because of the studio that created it, but the reasoning for most is simply that it was slow and uninteresting. And to me, that's a fair criticism. Not everyone is going to love a mystery anime to death. They reach a limited audience. For me, I'm a fan of mystery novels and mystery anime, but not to a great extent. This anime though made me respect mysteries that much more, so yeah, is it slow? Honestly, I think that just depends on if you like mysteries or not. Otherwise, the slowness of the first arc may not be a problem for you.
I don't smell anything. I swear, it stinks. There's some sort of acrid odor. It's like paint thinner. It's unmistakable.
Is she a dog?
Hyouka's characters are more interesting than they seem at first. There are characters I really didn't like in the beginning. I didn't really care for Chitanda and Satoshi, but over time the show developed its characters more, and I started to eventually like those characters. An example of what I hated about these characters in the beginning was I found Chitanda quite annoying. Maybe not the worst character in terms of writing at first, but she didn't do much for me in terms of what she added in value to the story. She would always get in the main character's face, and the camera loved her huge head and the whole frame when she uttered her "I just have to know" catchphrase that has since become my favorite thing about her. And with Satoshi, at first I felt he was just your cute token anime boy to basically romance the other supporting character Mayaka. But over time I came to really enjoy and like Satoshi as he had more of a purpose by the time the show got rolling into its first big arc. But even then, this really isn't that huge of a problem. It's just something small that I didn't really like about this show. And who knows, you may not notice these problems that I had. It could all just be in my head.
When Chitanda showed up, why didn't you just blow her off like the lazy bones we know and love? That was your fatal mistake this afternoon. You'd have been home already. Sometimes you don't know how to best live by your own motto.
Another great thing Hyouka does with this story is developing our main character, Hodoro. In the beginning of the show, Hodoro is this energy conservationist. He doesn't do it if he doesn't have to, and that is something that is repeated a healthy amount of times throughout the series. This is a key phrase in the show, just like Chitanda's "I just have to know" catchphrase. And it's important because this is the foundation for what Hodoro's character is, pretty much. You don't have to guess much about the guy when he basically outright says he'd rather do nothing than something. But little by little, the wheels of his old life start to fall off, and he changes and grows with the series' mysteries. Now, I have to give credit to Abi for this, as he was the one who told me about this theory first, but the mysteries of this series help Hodoro become who he is by the end of this. Think of it like this. These mysteries force him to view things from other people's perspectives, which in turn helps him experience more and grow as a character. The Hodoro in episode 22 is miles ahead of Hodoro from episode 1, hell, even episode 16. He goes through changes slowly, but in a satisfying manner that the viewer notices. And because of this, we can grasp the change of his character with ease. By the end of the series, I could tell you just about every way Hodoro has changed. And yeah, I've seen other series do this kind of development in this way before, but not to the level that Hyouka did it. Granted, not every storytelling method and philosophy are the same, but how many mystery anime based off slice of life have done what Hyouka has done to its level? There aren't a lot, if any, out there right now.
I understand you were trying to trick Chitanda and all, but there were more efficient ways. Anyway...
I wasn't actually trying to trick her.
No, of course you weren't. You were just putting the situation on hold for later.
So now I want to talk a little bit about each of the characters individually. And first off, I want to talk about Chitanda. She is a character that remains the most static out of all of the characters in this series. Not that she isn't a character with depth, but she serves a role for this series. And that role is pretty simple, and it's to be, in a way, the bait for Hodoro to basically keep doing stuff. Chitanda hooks Hodoro in, and it's obvious in the first episode why that is. Chitanda is that driving force the show needs to push Hodoro into getting involved with these mysteries. In many ways, without Chitanda, there is no Hyouka. Now, Mayuka and Satoshi do not have nearly enough pull in the show that Chitanda does, and this is why I really like Chitanda as a character. Her curiosity will always get the best of her. It's insatiable. In a way, she almost forces the viewer to like her at some point in the series. I admit I didn't like her in the beginning. Something about her just made me find her annoying. But she's such a utility character, and the fact that she is consistently one of the funniest characters in the show, and of course she's also well written, it's really hard to not like Chitanda. Not only that, but her antics like bowing into a microphone live on air is easily the most hilarious, kind of relatable thing I've seen in quite a good bit.
Is Chitanda really as smart as everyone claims she is? She seems like a total doofus to me.
As for our supporting characters, Satoshi and Mayuka, well, let's just say this. While Chitanda and Hodoro are doing whatever it is they are doing, Satoshi and Mayuka are consistently showing how much of a positive they are to this show. Their side stories have consequences to the main story thread or arcs, and they're possibly the most relatable characters in this anime. So, let's start off with Mayuka. She's the most outspoken of the Classics Club by far. She makes her opinion known, but isn't dumb and blurts out things she shouldn't. She takes her time and knows precisely when to wait her turn and when to talk. Remember that synopsis I read at the beginning? Calling her a stern character? Well, that's pretty much her. And she also has her quirks as well, like all the other characters in this anime do, which I find to be the most noticeable about her character. To me, she shows the most personality in the show. Only Chitanda sometimes reaching Mayuka's level in terms of personality. But for example, she cosplays, which shows her personality quite a bit. We even know what characters she likes in manga and anime, and the culture that she enjoys as well, as she's in the manga club. She's basically a geek for manga and the culture surrounding it, and that's what I really like about Mayuka. It's because she's a fellow weeb. As for Satoshi, he is probably the character I can relate to the most. He's somewhat of a hapless romantic who dreams big but is always grounded in reality. He's the kind of guy to change his handbag, and a good example of how to describe Satoshi is how the director would describe Satoshi. If Satoshi were to have a phone, every week he'd have a different wallpaper on it. Hell, probably even every day. He'd always be going through different wallpapers for different moods that he's in. You feel for Satoshi throughout the series, but he's always in the background because he's probably the most normal out of the Classic Club. You feel a lot for Satoshi throughout the series, but you never really notice him, as he's the most normal of the Classic Club quartet. But because he's the most normal, it doesn't mean he is as deep as the other characters. And probably the character I relate with the most because, honestly, I just really like Satoshi. He's just a great character that I really love. Altogether, the characters of Hyouka work together like a well-oiled machine. When the show's plot calls upon one of these characters, it feels natural and like it was going to head that direction anyways. They're all built up well too, especially with Hyouka being somewhat of a series based on the mundane or uninteresting sides of life. But that's the thing, Hyouka takes the mundane and everything and creates beauty.
It's pointless.
Yeah? Is life like a dull pencil?
What? What are you talking about? Was that supposed to be a joke?
If there is one thing KyoAni for the most part does perfectly these days, it's their art. They're known for creating some of the most detailed looking anime today, and whether you love them or hate them, most of their anime since the mid-2000s have consistently gotten better and better in this department. As for Hyouka, the art on display is something to marvel at here. Let's first talk about the show's overall quality and look before getting into something more deep. So to start off, the show has some very well designed backgrounds. Let's take for example in the early part of the series during the first big arc, the Hyouka arc, they are talking in the club room. If we look around in the room itself, we see things like stones on a windowsill, a cactus on a table, and a shelf with random assorted items. Not only that, but now look out that window. That's right, there was a student out there doing God knows what, but any other anime would have probably not done that. But KyoAni's attention to detail in this series cannot be understated. They turned what should have been a very simple scene into something incredibly complex and probably a nightmare to make as well. Now next up, I really want to get down into the character designs, and I first want to talk about Mayaka, as I believe hers to be one of the more unique. At first, Mayaka actually looks a little plain, but as the series goes on, there are more things about her design which become more apparent. For example, Mayaka is the smallest of the characters. She's short, and even Chitanda looks really tall compared to Mayaka. That little touch automatically lets me attach something to her. She becomes easier to pick out from the rest of the characters. It's not the hugest thing in the world, but it's probably something I noticed almost immediately and liked about her. Now, continuing along with the trend of supporting characters, we have Satoshi. As I mentioned before, he carries these handbags around with different designs on them. This is easily the thing people will probably identify him by. If he has a handbag, then it's probably Satoshi. His handbags really define the mood he wants to be in, more so than the mood he may be in as well. Honestly, I just really like this touch to his design quite a lot, and it's such a cool thing for his character to have. It also helps he's a cute KyoAni boy too.
This book will be your lucky charm on Friday, so take it with you. If you check it out during your lunch period and return it after school, your boyfriend will plan to kiss on you. Heck yeah!
Astounding.
And as for Hodoro, he has more of a adult design to him, but still has that boyish look. This was something the director of the series wanted because while Hodoro is a great detective and whatnot, he's still in high school, so they wanted to retain that round, cute look to him instead of making him look too much like an adult. This, to me, is what makes Hodoro look unique. He's taller than everyone else and physically more developed, but he's still just a kid. And lastly, we move on to Chitanda, which I believe to be the most unique of the characters in Hyouka. She has piercing violet eyes, a head of hair which makes 80s hair metal bands blush, and she's probably the most mature looking of the women in the Classics Club quartet. It cannot be understated how great of a design she has, and I feel the trait most people will get familiar with is her face. Of course, that's because it's in every frame. What Hyouka does with the character designs overall is phenomenal. Each character looks unique and has a feature about them which makes them easily identifiable. Satoshi's bag, Mayaka's tininess and her hair, Hodoro's adult-like presence, and of course Chitanda's piercing violet eyes. All of these things work together, and when you add the backgrounds to the mix, you have this formula that just kinda works. But what I really want to talk about now is the color palette a little bit, and it's something that's kinda genius. Hodoro doesn't want to live in a rose-colored life, so in the second episode, the color palette changes from being rosy and vibrant to dull and brown. This is done to signify that Hodoro has given up living a life that a normal high schooler would. In many ways, you could see this as Hodoro giving up on love and shutting himself off from everyone. This is another facet the show likes to show us as much as it can. Hodoro's life is dark and just drab. He coasts in life and he is generally a loser, and this color palette change helps us kinda see that visually. As for whether or not it ever changes back, well, you'll probably have to see it for yourself.
I recommend this dish for you.
This might end up costing you more than you think.
Hyouka's animation is great, and I want to talk about the facial expressions first off, because I thought they did this very, very well. Characters' emotions are at times conveyed simply through their face, and as an example is when, say, Mayaka in one of these episodes has this look of dread on her face that turns purple and her face kind of washes out. Another example is every Chitanda scene. In fact, I think she's probably the best scenes for examples of how well the animation is done in this show. There is always something about Chitanda that will always be unique to her scenes. She obviously has the whole calling card of taking up the whole screen with her face, we can't forget that, but she also has these great moments of genuine intrigue which I really like a lot. An example of this is episode 19, which is the episode that takes place in the singular room. She is animated to near perfection in terms of this, and it shows because she ends up conveying so many emotions through just her face. We'll talk more about that episode later though. I also like how creative this show gets with their animation while at the same time making it seem natural. As an example, episode 7 of Hyouka has them going to a hot spring, and to creatively censor the junk, they have things like mist and even rubber duckies cut in front of the shots. This not only was creative in how they did it, but it added to the comedy the series needed, because at times, this series has a really drab and dark tone, especially episode 7. Some more creative shots in this anime is, for example, in episode 21, when Mayaka takes a chocolate heart and just rips into it and bites into it. But I think the crown jewel of this anime in terms of animation happens in episode 1. And of course, many of you will immediately know what I'm talking about. We've already shown it in the video, but in an iconic scene, Hodoro starts to leave to go home, but Chitanda catches him and starts talking to him. While this is happening, her hair starts to grow, and soon enough, it captures Hodoro and flowers start to blossom from her hair. This is another great scene to show that Hodoro is now ensnared in Chitanda's world. There, of course, are many other things you can take away from this as well. As an example, Hodoro's sexual awakening, among other things.
First, let's set a few things straight. I'm willing to bet none of those girls would have time to get any use out of that book on a break. It's too enormous for that.
As I mentioned earlier, episode 19 has some of the best animation in the show, even though it takes place in one room. Both Chitanda and Hodoro are very expressive in this episode because there isn't a whole lot going on otherwise. This episode is filled with these great moments where Chitanda starts off, for example, across the table, and by the middle of the episode, she's right next to Hodoro and sitting right next to him, almost touching each other even at times, and then at other times in the episode, later on, they go back to being pretty separated, and then they do it all over again. This is a very special episode just for the fact that it was masterfully told and directed in terms of that. But how many episodes are based upon a made-up situation that has no consequence to the main characters, but at the same time has this incredible art style direction and animation? For only being in one room, you can't understate how great this episode was. This was masterful storytelling from both the story and animation, and this episode cemented to me how great Hyouka really is. So now I want to go back to episode 7 for a moment, and then we'll talk about the show in general with some cool little things that I noticed. And this is kind of just me rambling on about some very cool things before we move on to the last two important segments that I want to talk about. And I first want to talk about episode 7 with the animation here. And generally kind of the art too kind of plays into this, but it's mostly animation. So in one of the scenes, of course no spoilers, in episode 7, Chitanda and Hodoro are walking together outside. And it's a simple scene really. They're walking on a sidewalk, there's a bunch of trees, the sun is casting down on them, this awesome shadow, and they're going back to the place they're staying at. You know, it's a very simple scene both story-wise and visually. If you look closer, and I've showed this already throughout the video a couple times in a couple screenshots, but now you're seeing just screenshots from episode 7. Have you noticed it? And if you have, then good job on this. But look at the characters in these screenshots. What do you see on them? That's shadows. Shadows from the leaves that are casted from the sun onto these characters. And it's such an incredible technique that they did here. And it's quintessential KyoAni to do something like this. And I thought this was just incredible. I haven't seen anything else like this in anime. Honestly, it looks like they just took a real person, they put him under a tree, and they just traced right over it. This is an example of why KyoAni is up there at the top of the food chain when it comes to anime studios. It's why they're probably the most popular right now. It's because they put so much detail into these small scenes. And earlier when I talked about as well, there was a shot where you could see out of the window in the club room, you could see this guy just walking in the background, fully animated. They put so much work into their anime, and honestly, some of the stuff you'll just never notice it unless you take still screenshots and you analyze these things. And that's what I like about it. Another shot that you've probably seen as well, the end of episode 1, where Hodoro and Satoshi are walking, and there's a bunch of pillars to the left of the shot, and to the right there's a marketplace with many different stores and many different signs, and some of them have different things out to showcase what's inside, and they look different, and to the left there's these pillars that are casting off their own shadows. In that same scene, and it's near the end of the scene too, they're walking by, and it just got done raining, and what you will see is that there's water on the pavement, and that right there already is like, that's a lot of attention to detail of what's happening in that scene. Now, if you look at the reflections, there's actually reflections off of the rain of the people walking by and the cars driving by. And there's little ripples sometimes too, you can see. This anime really has, honestly, some of the best art and animation I've ever seen in a KyoAni anime. And we're in the height of Violet Evergarden at the time of this recording. I find it hard-pressed to say that Violet Evergarden looks better than Hyouka. And that's just me speaking honestly. And the last thing I want to talk about, this is a little cool one, and not a lot of people will even really care about this, like, oh, whatever, like, it's not that big, but it's a cool little touch that I thought it was cool that they did. And of course, I'm talking about the shadows from the characters' hair on their faces. So, depending on what kind of lighting they're in, you will see the outline of their hair cast down on their foreheads or on the rest of their face. A very good example of this is Irisu, and I know a lot of people like Irisu for different reasons, but Irisu, she has this strand of hair that goes down her face. As you can see, there's a shadow from her hair casting down on her face. It's something anime don't usually do, and I talk about it in the Anime Nomad podcast a little more than this, but, you know, a lot of anime have that whole thing where the hair covers the eye and you can see through the eye. And that's been a staple of anime since, you know, the 80s and 90s. Really, the 90s when they started to really use it. But this anime, Hyouka, it's just an incredible experience, and the art and animation, particularly the animation I think a little bit more than the art, is incredible. I can't really think of another anime that touches Hyouka and how much detail it really has. But sadly, we must move on. I can't keep you here forever, so let's go to the next segment.
That's crazy.
Man, you've always been such a know-it-all.
I prefer the term database, sir.
Now let's talk more about those scenes where the animators go crazy while Hodoro explains the mystery to the audience. And first off, a little fun fact. Those scenes for the most part are not normal 2D animation, but are in fact CGI. And when I heard that, I was absolutely floored. And yeah, sure, some of you can see was CGI because it was impossible to do in animation, but to learn that basically all of it is CGI was pretty surprising. These scenes are usually the most detailed and explorative the show can get. In fact, the director of the series actually told the staff working on this to get crazy and get really inventive when these scenes. In a series with already great animation, when you have these other scenes come out of nowhere that are unique to each episode and do something completely different for the story and the characters, and just they do something different each time, and they don't reuse anything or stick to a formula with these, well, you have to really wonder if a lot of this show is made by people who have figured out how to do real freaking magic. To simply put it, Hyouka has some of the best animation KyoAni has ever produced. Everything has so much detail in it that at times makes me wonder why they went to so much trouble in the first place. The series is about taking the mundane and turning it into a mystery. Like I've said a million times before, these aren't mysteries that have consequence. Without these amazing visuals and animation, Hyouka would be half the series it is now. The show really needed these scenes where Hodoro explains the mysteries in detail where it's all CGI animation. Without these elements in the show, Hyouka becomes somewhat uninteresting. If I'm allowed to make a bold claim here, I think that Hyouka's animation and art are some of the most important things in the series. Without it, there is no Hyouka, and that in itself is something special to me. You don't get many series these days where the animation is the reason it's being talked about for years and years.
When I showed up, the door to this room was most definitely unlocked. But when Odaki got here, it was bolted and he had to use his key to get inside. So what happened?
For the score, the music, whatever you want to call it, the series does this very well. And in fact, where the first arc fails to capture many people's imaginations, I think that the score was easily the best thing about those first episodes. It did an amazing job carrying, and I say that because I don't have a better word at the moment, the show until I got to the second arc. It was a score that could bend to fit any facet of the story. So, you need a song that can be calm and smooth? You need a score that's full of emotion and depth? I could go on with this, but I think you get the point. KyoAni did an incredible job with this score, but really I should be giving credit to the guy who did the score, Kohei Tanaka. Kohei is probably best known for primarily working on One Piece since the very beginning of the series, but his work here really impressed me so much that he will be synonymous with his work on Hyouka. And before we move on to the English dub, I do want to give you guys a list of episodes I thought had the best score. And I'm doing this simply because these are probably episodes you should look out for when it comes comes to the score. So when you're watching this series, pay a little bit more attention to the music. So the list is episodes 5, 11, and 19 through 22. These are, in my opinion, the best scoring the show has to offer. Episode 5, which is the climax of the Hyouka arc, has some really haunting music that helps really sell the episode, but as well everything that leads up to the end of that arc. Episode 11, which is probably one of the best episodes of the anime, is also the first time we see Hodoro in a different way. I can't say much in terms of the story, but the score here fits what's going on in this arc and what's going on in this episode. It does a couple interesting things in the climax that you should listen for in those final scenes. I won't tell you because it's interesting, but you should look out definitely for those scenes at the end of episode 11. As for the last 3 episodes, well, there isn't really that much to say other than that it's scored in such a way that's using a lot of elements from the earlier arcs and kind of recaps them or reprises them in these episodes. I won't say they're as explorative as the Hyouka arc, but for sure, these final episodes have some amazing depth to their scores, and that's something to commend.
Since when are you into classic lit? What's that? What does a letter from your sister have to do with it?
She sent it to me from India, someplace in the north called Varanasi.
It cannot be stated enough how Funimation can easily put out a half-assed dub if it wants to. Currently, I'm watching King's Game for a future video and review, so subscribe for that, I guess. And it's bad. Easily one of the worst Funimation dubs of all time. But with Hyouka, Funimation really put their best on this anime. Of course, as you already know, this dub came out in 2017 after 5 years of licensing issues in the West getting resolved. So this dub uses some veteran talents from Funimation like Jad Saxton. But for the most part, this dub is using newer talents, and they do an incredible job. Adam Gibbs, for example, absolutely nails Hodoro and is to me the voice I think of when that character comes to mind. It also can't be understated just how great the other characters are as well. Mayaka, Satoshi, and Chitanda are all very well voice acted. And if I am to nitpick something though, and this is more of a personal preference, but I think Chitanda's voice sounds a tad bit unrealistic. It's not bad voice acting, mind you, but I don't know anyone who has that airy tone that she does. Granted, this is an anime, but the series has this grounded focus and a thick layer of realism. Other than that, though, the dub is perfect. If you like dubs, then this is a must-watch just for the voice acting. If you don't like dubs, then I'm sure you've already left a comment asking me to kill myself.
I see what's going on. Your sister's blackmailing you.
They're threatening to shut it down for lack of members. She wants me to join and help keep the club alive.
Hyouka is easily a tie for my favorite KyoAni series of all time, with it being right up there with Sound Euphonium. Yeah, that's my favorite one. It was a series that at first I didn't think anything of, really. I knew it was good, but as soon as I started to analyze it more and get more into it, there were these layers upon layers of depth. So much so that this review doesn't have everything I actually wanted to talk about in it. Hyouka is a series that honestly cannot be reviewed in one video. It's a series that you could easily write a book on if you wanted to. Hell, this review itself is a massive 12 pages long. Before this, my longest review was 7 pages. If there is one series from KyoAni you should at the very least give a good watch, it's Hyouka. It's honestly one of the best experiences I have ever had watching an anime, and there is a part of me that wishes that it never ended. Hyouka gets the first ever 10 out of 10. And there it is, like I said, the first ever 10 out of 10 I've given on this review scale. I actually thought I'd never hand this score out, to be honest, but I feel Hyouka did more than enough to earn it. This anime is so unique because it's a human show about people, not wacky isekai characters we've all come to either hate or love, and that's not dissing the isekai genre, it's simply an example. I urge you all to give Hyouka a shot though. This is KyoAni at its best, doing some of the best work it has ever done. I promise you that this anime will not disappoint. Sure, the first episodes are slow, but by the end, it all becomes worth it. And before I want to go, I want to talk about a couple more small things. This anime, of course, was recommended to me by the anime master, Abi, in the Discord server, which you should join. But also, since you watch the whole review, if you could do me a favor, go into the description and there should be a link to Abi's channel. Well, rather, there should be a link. It says Hyouka, the Anime Nomad podcast. Please click on that, go watch it. It's over on Abi's channel. Me, him, Rising Sun Reviews and Conda Fiction talk about this anime and do a complete breakdown and discussion of this show. So all links you need will once again be in the description of this review. And I also recommend, if you're into this anime, then please check out a website that does a whole breakdown of Hyouka in multiple different articles, and they even have interviews with the directors. That will also be in the description as well, and I used that as some of my source material in this review. So please, if you haven't already, buy this anime on Blu-ray and support the official release. God damn it, it's good! So thank you all for watching, and if you're new to the channel or whatever, then please, 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 consider giving me a subscribe, consider giving the video a like, and also consider having a nice day. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching the video.